The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store just as the afternoon sun beat down on Loveland, Colorado, and Olivia Vaughn stepped onto the dusty street with nothing but a worn carpet bag, a faded blue dress that had seen better days, and a secret she could barely acknowledge herself. The summer of 1878 had turned the earth beneath her feet into something hard and unforgiving, much like the world she had left behind in St. Louis 3 weeks ago. She pressed a hand to her stomach, a gesture she was still learning to control, and tried to steady her breathing as the driver tossed her bag down without ceremony. "This is as far as you go, miss," he said, already climbing back onto his seat. "Next run east is in 4 days if you change your mind." She would not be changing her mind. There was nothing to go back to except shame and whispers, and a mother who had looked at her with eyes full of disappointment when Olivia had finally confessed the truth. The man who had promised her everything had disappeared the moment she had told him about the baby, leaving her with choices that were not really choices at all. So she had taken what little money she had saved and bought a ticket west, where nobody knew her name or her circumstances. The town of Loveland sprawled before her like something out of a dream, or maybe a prayer she had not quite finished saying. False-fronted buildings lined the main street, their wooden facades painted in colors that the sun had begun to fade. A saloon stood on one corner, its doors swinging as cowboys wandered in and out, their spurs jangling against the floorboards. Across the street, a church steeple rose toward the cloudless sky, a reminder that civilization was trying to take root even here in this wild corner of the world. Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow despite the summer heat. She picked up her carpet bag and started walking, uncertain of where she was going, but knowing she needed to find lodging before nightfall. The few people on the street glanced at her with the mild curiosity that strangers always inspired in small towns, but nobody stopped her or asked questions. That was good. Questions were the last thing she needed. The boarding house was easy enough to find, a two-story structure with a hand-painted sign that read, "Rooms available, decent folk only." Olivia wondered if she still qualified as decent folk, but she climbed the steps to the porch anyway and knocked on the door. A woman in her 50s answered, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "Help you?" the woman asked. "I need a room," Olivia said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just until I can find work and more permanent lodging." The woman looked her over, taking in the worn dress and the carpet bag and probably a dozen other details that Olivia could not control. "You got money?" "Some. Enough for a week, maybe 2 if I am careful. Name is Martha Colby. I run a respectable house here. No drinking, no men visitors, no trouble. You follow those rules, we will get along fine." "I understand, Mrs. Colby." "It is Miss Colby, but you can call me Martha." She stepped aside to let Olivia enter. "You running from something or towards something?" The question caught Olivia off guard, but she supposed it was fair. "Neither. Just trying to start over." Martha nodded as if this answer satisfied her. "Room is upstairs, second door on the left. Meals are included if you want them. Breakfast at 7, dinner at 6. You miss them, you go hungry. I do not run a restaurant." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the street. Olivia set her carpet bag down and sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted in a way that went beyond the physical. She had been traveling for weeks, each day bringing her farther from everything she had known and closer to an uncertain future. The baby inside her was still small enough that her dresses hid the truth, but that would not last forever. She had maybe 2 or 3 months before her condition became obvious to anyone who looked at her. She needed work, needed money, needed a plan that went beyond simply surviving from one day to the next. She pressed her hands to her face and allowed herself one moment of weakness, one brief instant where she acknowledged how terrified she was. Then she stood up, smoothed her dress, and went to the washstand to clean the dust from her face and hands. She would figure this out. She had to. The next morning, Olivia set out to find work. She tried the general store first, but the owner already had help and did not need anyone else. The hotel was not hiring. The dressmaker had no work to offer. By noon, she had walked the length of the main street twice and was beginning to feel the first stirrings of real panic. She had enough money for 2 weeks at the boarding house, maybe 3 if she skipped meals, but after that, she would be destitute. She was standing in front of the church, trying to decide whether to go inside and pray or keep searching, when she heard a voice behind her. "You look lost." She turned and found herself looking at a man who seemed to have stepped out of every story she had ever heard about the West. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. His hair was dark and slightly too long, curling at the collar of his blue shirt. He wore a gun belt slung low on his hips, the holster tied down in the manner of someone who knew how to use it. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, gray like storm clouds, with an expression that was both wary and kind. "I am looking for work," she said, deciding that honesty was probably her best option. "I just arrived yesterday." "What kind of work?" "Any kind. I can cook, clean, sew, keep accounts. I worked in my father's store for years before he died." The man considered this, his gray eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. She forced herself to meet his gaze, to stand straight and tall, despite the exhaustion that still clung to her bones. "Name is Yates Owens," he said finally. "I run a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. My housekeeper quit 2 weeks ago, said she was too old to be cooking for a bunch of cowboys and keeping house at the same time. I have been making do with my own cooking, but the men are threatening mutiny." Hope flared in Olivia's chest, sharp and almost painful. "I am a good cook, and I do not mind hard work. It is not easy. The ranch house is big, and there are usually 6 or 7 men around during the day, more during roundup. You would have your own room, off the kitchen, meals provided, of course, and a salary of $15 a month." $15. It was more than she had hoped for, more than she probably deserved, given her complete lack of references. She opened her mouth to accept immediately, then hesitated. "Mr. Owens, I should tell you that I do not have any references. I came here from St. Louis, and I left in something of a hurry." "You in trouble with the law?" "No, nothing like that." He studied her for another long moment, and Olivia had the unsettling feeling that he could see right through her, past her carefully maintained composure to the secret she carried. But when he spoke, his voice was calm and matter-of-fact. "I do not need references. I need someone who will show up and do the work. You think you can do that?" "Yes." "Then the job is yours. I will come by tomorrow morning with a wagon to collect you. Be ready at 8. He tipped his hat to her and walked away, before she could thank him properly, his long strides carrying him down the street toward a dusty brown horse tied in front of the saloon. Olivia watched him go, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had work. She had a place to go. But she was also about to put herself in close quarters with a man who seemed to see too much, and she could only hope that her secret would remain hidden long enough for her to figure out what came next. Yates Owens arrived promptly at 8 the next morning, driving a wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. Olivia was waiting on the porch of the boarding house, her carpetbag at her feet, and her debts to Martha Colby settled. She had spent the previous evening trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong, and now that the moment had arrived, she felt almost calm. "Morning," Yates said, jumping down from the wagon seat. He took her carpetbag and stowed it in the back with an ease that suggested considerable strength. Then he offered her his hand to help her up onto the seat. His grip was warm and calloused, his fingers gentle despite their obvious power. "Thank you," Olivia said, settling herself on the wooden bench. "It is about an hour's drive," Yates said, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. "The road is decent enough, but there are a few rough patches." They drove through the town and out onto the open prairie, where the grass stretched toward the mountains like a golden ocean. The morning air was cool and fresh, scented with sage and wildflowers. Olivia found herself relaxing despite her nervousness, lulled by the rhythmic creak of the wagon and the steady clip of hooves against the packed earth. You said you came from St. Louis, Yates said after a while. That is a long way to travel. I wanted a fresh start. Fair enough. He did not press for details, and Olivia felt a surge of gratitude for his restraint. The ranch has been in my family for 10 years. My father started it, but he died 5 years back. My mother followed him a year later. It is just me now, and the hands I hire on. I am sorry for your loss. Thank you. They were good people. He was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The house is bigger than I need, but my mother always dreamed of filling it with grandchildren, never got the chance. Olivia felt a pang in her chest at the mention of grandchildren, thinking of the baby growing inside her and the family it would never have. She pushed the thought away and focused on the landscape rolling past them. The ranch appeared gradually, first as a distant cluster of buildings, and then with increasing detail. The main house was a low, sprawling structure built of logs and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around three sides. Behind it stood a barn, a bunkhouse, and various corrals and outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the pastures, their red and white hides bright against the green grass. It was, Olivia thought, a beautiful place, the kind of place where a person could build a life. Yates pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and helped her down. I will show you around, he said, carrying her carpet bag up the porch steps. The interior of the house was surprisingly well maintained, with polished wood floors and furniture that showed signs of careful craftsmanship. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. The kitchen was large and well equipped, with a cast iron stove, a pump for water, and shelves lined with dishes and supplies. Your room is through here, Yates said, leading her through a door off the kitchen. The room was small but comfortable, with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. The privy is out back, and there is a bathhouse next to it. The men know to stay clear of the main house unless they are called for meals or work. It is perfect, Olivia said, and she meant it. The room was more than she had dared to hope for, a private space where she could retreat when the weight of her secret became too heavy to carry in front of others. I will let you settle in. When you are ready, you can start looking through the kitchen and seeing what needs to be done. The men usually eat breakfast around 6, dinner at noon, and supper around 7. If that does not work for you, we can adjust. That will be fine. He nodded and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Olivia sat down on the bed and looked around her new home. For the first time in weeks, she felt something that might have been hope. The first few days passed in a blur of work. Olivia rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, a rotating group of weathered men who treated her with a careful politeness that suggested Yates had warned them to be on their best behavior. She learned their names and their preferences, who liked their coffee black and who wanted extra biscuits, who told jokes at the table, and who ate in silence. They were good men for the most part, the kind who worked hard and expected nothing more than fair pay and decent food. Yates ate with the men but said little, his attention focused on his meal or on the work that needed to be done that day. Olivia found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, noticing the way he listened to his men and made decisions without hesitation, the way he was always the first one up and the last one to quit for the day. He was a good boss, she realized, the kind of man who led by example rather than by command. After the men left for their work, Olivia cleaned the kitchen and the main house, swept the floors, and washed the windows, mended shirts and sheets that the previous housekeeper had left in a basket by the door. The work was endless but not unpleasant, and she found a kind of peace in the rhythm of it. Here, in this remote place, she could almost forget about the future and focus on the present moment. The mornings were the hardest when the sickness that had plagued her for weeks returned with a vengeance. She learned to keep a bucket near her bed and to rise earlier than necessary so she could compose herself before anyone else was awake. She was careful to hide any signs of her condition, wearing loose dresses and avoiding situations where her changing body might be noticed. So far, no one had said anything, and she hoped her secret would remain hidden for a while longer. It was on her fifth day at the ranch that Yates found her in the barn, where she had gone to gather eggs from the hens that roosted in the hayloft. She had been feeling dizzy all morning, and the climb up the ladder had left her breathless and shaky. She was sitting on a bale of hay, trying to steady herself, when she heard his footsteps on the floor below. "Olivia, you up there?" "Yes." She stood quickly, too quickly, and the world tilted sideways. She reached for the ladder but missed, and then she was falling, tumbling through empty air with the ground rushing up to meet her. She never hit the ground. Instead, strong arms caught her, pulling her against a solid chest as Yates broke her fall. For a moment they stood frozen, his arms around her waist and her hands clutching his shoulders. She could feel the steady beat of his heart through his shirt, could smell the scent of leather and sun-warmed skin. "Are you all right?" His voice was low, concerned and very close to her ear. "I am fine. I just got dizzy for a moment." He set her down carefully, his hands lingering at her waist as if to make sure she was steady. "You have been working too hard. You need to rest." "I am fine," she repeated, stepping back from his touch, even though part of her wanted to lean into it. "Thank you for catching me." "Olivia." He said her name like it was a question. "Are you sick? Do you need a doctor?" "No. I just need to eat something. I skipped breakfast this morning." It was a lie, but a believable one, and after a moment Yates nodded. "Come on, I will make you something." She followed him back to the house, acutely aware of how close she had come to disaster. If he had not been there, if she had hit the ground, she might have lost the baby. The realization left her shaken in a way that had nothing to do with the fall itself. She had not wanted this pregnancy, had spent weeks resenting the life growing inside her, but the thought of losing it filled her with an unexpected grief. Yates made her sit at the kitchen table while he prepared a plate of bread and cheese and cold beef. He worked with an easy competence that suggested he had been taking care of himself for a long time, his movements efficient and sure. When he set the plate in front of her, along with a cup of water, she found herself blinking back tears. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his gray eyes searching her face. "You do not have to tell me anything you do not want to tell me. But if you are in trouble, if you need help, I want you to know that you can ask." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. She had expected judgment, or prying questions, or at least a demand for explanations. Instead, he was offering her something she had not received from anyone else since her life had fallen apart: unconditional support. "I am not in trouble with the law," she said, forcing herself to eat even though she had no appetite. "I just needed to get away from my old life, start fresh." "All right." He stood up, apparently satisfied with this answer. "You finish eating and then go rest for a while. The dishes can wait." He left her alone in the kitchen, and Olivia sat there for a long time, staring at the plate in front of her and trying to understand why this stranger had shown her more compassion in 5 days than anyone else had in months. Summer deepened into a succession of hot, clear days. Olivia fell into the rhythm of ranch life, learning when the men needed coffee and when they needed space, how to stretch supplies to feed a hungry crew, and how to make bread that did not turn into rocks in the oven. Her body began to change in ways that she could no longer ignore, her waist thickening and her dresses growing tight across the middle. She let out seams and wore aprons to hide the evidence and tried not to think about what would happen when concealment was no longer possible. Yates was a constant presence, always there but never intrusive, offering help without being asked and respecting her privacy when she needed it. He fixed the pump in the kitchen when it started leaking, brought her fresh vegetables from the garden that one of the hands tended, made sure she had everything she needed to do her job. They fell into an easy companionship, talking over coffee in the mornings before the men arrived for breakfast, sharing stories about their lives in the careful way of people who were still learning to trust each other. She learned that he was 28 years old, that he had worked on the ranch since he was old enough to sit a horse, that he loved this land with a fierce pride that colored everything he did. He talked about his parents with a mixture of affection and grief, about his father's determination to build something lasting and his mother's gentle strength. He never asked about her life in St. Louis, and she was grateful for his restraint. It was late July when everything changed. Olivia woke before dawn, as she always did, but this time the sickness that usually passed quickly grew worse instead of better. She barely made it to the bucket before she was retching violently, her body shaking with the force of it. When she finally stopped, she was so weak she could barely stand. She forced herself to get dressed and start breakfast, but every smell made her stomach churn. The coffee she usually loved turned her insides to water. The bacon she was frying smelled like death. She made it through preparing the meal by sheer willpower, setting out plates and cups with hands that trembled. The men came in for breakfast, and she served them with her usual efficiency, but she could feel Yates watching her with concern. When she reached across the table to refill his coffee cup, a wave of dizziness washed over her, and she swayed on her feet. "Olivia." His voice seemed to come from very far away. She tried to answer, tried to tell him she was fine, but the words would not come. The room spun around her, and then the darkness rose up and swallowed her whole. When she woke, she was lying on her bed with a cool cloth on her forehead. Yates sat in a chair beside her, his face drawn with worry. The room was full of afternoon light, which meant she had been unconscious for hours. "What happened?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "You fainted. Doc Pritchard is on his way." Panic shot through her. "No, I do not need a doctor." "You collapsed in the middle of breakfast. You have been losing weight instead of gaining it, and you look like you have not slept properly in weeks. You need a doctor." "Please." She tried to sit up, but he gently pushed her back down. "I cannot afford a doctor." "I will pay for it. Just let him examine you." Before she could argue further, she heard the sound of a wagon outside and voices in the main room. A minute later, an older man with white hair and a black medical bag entered her room. Yates stood up, but he did not leave, and Olivia did not have the strength to ask him to. "I am Dr. Pritchard," the man said, setting his bag on the dresser. "Mr. Owens tells me you fainted this morning. Have you been feeling poorly for a while?" Olivia looked at Yates, then back at the doctor. She could lie, but what was the point? In another month or two, the truth would be obvious to anyone who looked at her. Better to get it over with now. "I am pregnant," she said, the words falling into the quiet room like stones into still water. "About 3 months along, I think." The doctor's expression did not change, but Yates went very still. Olivia could not bring herself to look at him, could not bear to see the judgment or disgust that must be written on his face. "I see," Dr. Pritchard said. "And has this pregnancy been difficult so far?" "I have been sick most mornings, and I get dizzy sometimes. That is not unusual, but the fainting is concerning, as is your apparent weight loss. Have you been eating properly?" "When I can keep food down, yes." The doctor examined her with brisk efficiency, checking her pulse and listening to her heart, pressing gently on her abdomen and asking questions about her symptoms. Through it all, Yates stood by the window, his back to the room, his shoulders rigid. "You are malnourished and exhausted," the doctor said finally. "The baby seems to be developing normally, but you need to take better care of yourself. More rest, smaller meals throughout the day instead of 3 large ones, and plenty of water. I will leave some powders that should help with the nausea." "Thank you. I will check on you again in a few weeks." "Mr. Owens, may I speak with you outside?" They left, closing the door behind them, and Olivia lay back against the pillows, feeling utterly drained. She had known this moment was coming, but that did not make it any easier. She would have to leave now, of course, No respectable man would keep an unwed pregnant woman in his house, not without inviting scandal. She would go back to town, find some kind of work that did not require living in, and figure out how to survive until the baby came. She was trying to decide how much time she had to pack her belongings when the door opened and Yates came back in. He pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down, his gray eyes serious but not unkind. The doctor says you need to take it easy for the next few days. No heavy work. I will be leaving, Olivia said, forcing the words out past the tightness in her throat. I understand that my presence here is no longer appropriate. Why would you leave? She stared at him, certain she had misheard. Because I am pregnant and unmarried. Because keeping me here would damage your reputation. I do not care about my reputation, and neither should you. You do not understand. People will talk. They will assume things. Let them assume whatever they want. You have a job here and a place to live, and you are not going anywhere until you are ready. The kindness in his voice broke something inside her. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them, hot and fast and bitter. She turned her face away, ashamed of her weakness, but Yates reached out and gently turned it back. Tell me what happened, he said softly. Tell me why you are here. So she told him about James, the charming clerk who had worked in the store next to her father's, who had courted her with flowers and pretty words, about how he had promised to marry her and how she had believed him, about the night she had given in to his persuasion and the consequences that had followed, about how he had disappeared the moment she told him about the baby, leaving her to face her mother's disappointment and the town's judgment alone. I tried to keep it hidden, she said, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. I thought maybe I could figure something out before anyone noticed, but my mother found out, and she said I had brought shame on the family. She gave me enough money for a ticket west and told me not to come back. Yates listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as the story unfolded. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Your mother was wrong, he said finally, and so was that man. What happened to you was not your fault. I should have been smarter. I should not have trusted him. He should have kept his promises, and your mother should have stood by you. He stood up, and for a moment Olivia thought he was going to leave. Instead, he knelt beside the bed so that his eyes were level with hers. Listen to me. You have a home here for as long as you need it. You and your baby. I do not care what anyone in town thinks, and neither should you. You are safe here. Why? The question burst out of her before she could stop it. Why would you do this for me? He was quiet for so long that she thought he was not going to answer. Then he reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers closing gently around hers. Because everyone deserves a second chance, he said, and because I would hate to see you leave. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Olivia felt her heart begin to race, felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon heat. She looked into his gray eyes and saw something there that took her breath away. Not pity, not obligation, but genuine caring. Thank you, she whispered. He squeezed her hand once and then stood up. Get some rest. I will bring you something to eat in a little while. After he left, Olivia lay in the dimness and tried to process what had just happened. She had told him the truth, the ugly, shameful truth that she had been hiding for months, and he had not rejected her. Instead, he had offered her safety and shelter without asking for anything in return. It was more than she had expected, more than she thought she deserved, and she did not know what to do with the gratitude and confusion and something else that was swirling inside her. The following days passed in a strange kind of limbo. Yates insisted that she rest, taking over much of the cooking himself and enlisting the help of the ranch hands for the cleaning. Olivia protested at first, but he ignored her objections with the same calm stubbornness he applied to everything else. She found herself with hours of unexpected leisure, time to sit on the porch and watch the world go by, to read the books that lined the shelves in the main room, to simply exist without the constant pressure of work. The men treated her the same as they always had, which surprised her until she realized that Yates must have said something to them. Whatever he had told them, it was enough to forestall any gossip or judgment. They tipped their hats to her when they passed, made jokes at meals, and treated her with the same respect they always had. As her strength returned, so did her appetite. The nausea began to ease, and she found herself actually enjoying food for the first time in months. Yates made sure she had plenty to eat, bringing her plates of food throughout the day and sitting with her while she ate, talking about the ranch or the weather or nothing in particular. It was during one of these conversations, a week after her collapse, that Olivia worked up the courage to ask the question that had been haunting her. "Why have you never married?" They were sitting on the porch in the evening, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. Yates had a cup of coffee in his hands, and he stared into it for a long moment before answering. "I was engaged once. Her name was Sarah. We grew up together, and everyone just assumed we would get married someday. But when my father died, and I inherited the ranch, she decided she did not want to be a rancher's wife. She wanted to move to Denver, live in a proper house with proper society. I could not leave this place, and she could not stay. So we went our separate ways. I am sorry." He shrugged. "It was 5 years ago. I have made my peace with it. This ranch is my life, and I do not regret choosing it. But I would be lying if I said I did not get lonely sometimes." Olivia understood loneliness. She had been lonely for months, maybe longer, surrounded by people but feeling utterly alone. But here, in this place, with this quiet man beside her, she felt less alone than she had in a long time. "I am glad I came here," she said softly. Yates turned to look at her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "So am I." August arrived with its relentless heat, turning the prairie grass brown and lowering the water levels in the streams. Olivia's pregnancy became more obvious with each passing day, her body changing in ways that she could no longer hide. She worried about going into town, about facing the stares and whispers that would inevitably follow, but Yates seemed unconcerned. "Anyone who has a problem with it can answer to me," he said one morning when she expressed her worries. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." But when they did go into town for supplies, Olivia could feel the weight of curious eyes following them. Women whispered behind their hands, and men looked away with barely concealed disapproval. She held her head high and tried to ignore them, but it was hard not to feel the sting of their judgment. They were loading supplies into the wagon when a woman approached them. She was middle-aged, with graying brown hair and a kind face, dressed in a simple calico dress. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Yates. "I am Helen Morrison. I run the school here in town." "I know who you are, Mrs. Morrison. This is Olivia Vaughn. She is my housekeeper." Helen's eyes took in Olivia's condition without comment. "I am actually looking for a housekeeper myself. My husband passed away last year, and I am finding it difficult to manage the house and the school on my own. I know you are working for Mr. Owens, Miss Vaughn, but if you ever find yourself in need of different employment, I would be happy to discuss it with you." The offer was kind and clearly motivated by a desire to help, but Olivia had no intention of leaving the ranch. "Thank you, Mrs. Morrison, but I am happy where I am." "Of course, but the offer stands. Should you change your mind?" She nodded to both of them and walked away. "She means well," Yates said as they finished loading the wagon. "But I am glad you are staying." "So am I." They drove back to the ranch in comfortable silence, and Olivia found herself thinking about how much her life had changed in just 2 months. She had arrived in Loveland expecting nothing, hoping for nothing, and instead she had found a place where she felt safe and valued. She had found Yates, whose quiet strength and unexpected kindness had become the center of her world. She was beginning to realize, with a mixture of wonder and fear, that her feelings for him went deeper than gratitude. She looked forward to their conversations, to the sound of his voice and the rare smile that occasionally crossed his face. She found herself watching him when he worked, admiring the easy strength of his movements and the way he treated his horses with the same gentle respect he showed everyone. She thought about him at night when she lay in bed, wondering what it would be like to be held by him, to be loved by him. But she could not say any of this, could not risk ruining the fragile peace they had built. He had offered her shelter and protection, not love, and she had no right to expect more. It was late August when the storm came. Olivia had been feeling restless all day, uncomfortable in her own skin, and when the clouds began to gather over the mountains, she welcomed the promise of rain. But this was no gentle summer shower. The sky turned black, and the wind picked up with a ferocity that rattled the windows. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that shook the house to its foundations. The ranch hands secured the animals and battened down the outbuildings, then retreated to the bunkhouse to wait out the storm. Yates came into the house just as the rain began, his clothes already soaked through. "It is going to be a bad one," he said, stripping off his wet shirt and reaching for a dry one from the hook by the door. Olivia caught a glimpse of his bare torso, all muscle and sun-bronzed skin, and felt heat rise to her cheeks. She turned away quickly, focusing on the stew she was stirring. The storm raged for hours, the rain coming down in sheets, and the wind howling like a living thing. Olivia tried to distract herself with work, but her nerves were stretched thin. Every crack of thunder made her jump, and the constant roar of the rain was almost deafening. They ate dinner in the main room, the food tasting like ash in Olivia's mouth. Yates noticed her distress and suggested they move to the parlor area, where the fireplace provided a warm glow that pushed back the storm's darkness. "You do not like storms," he observed, settling into the chair across from her. "I have never liked them. When I was a child, our house was struck by lightning. It did not burn down, but I have been afraid of storms ever since." As if to punctuate her words, a massive crack of lightning lit up the room, followed immediately by thunder so loud it felt like the world was ending. Olivia cried out and instinctively covered her head with her hands. In an instant, Yates was beside her, pulling her into his arms. "It is all right," he murmured, his voice steady and calm. "You are safe. I have got you." She clung to him, her face pressed against his chest, and felt his heart beating strong and sure beneath her cheek. His arms were warm and solid around her, and for the first time since the storm began, she felt the tension start to ease from her body. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am being foolish." "You are not foolish. Everyone is afraid of something." "What are you afraid of?" He was quiet for a moment, his hand gently stroking her hair. "Losing this place. Failing at the one thing my father entrusted to me. Being alone." The admission surprised her. He always seemed so confident, so sure of himself and his place in the world. But beneath that calm exterior, he carried his own fears and doubts. "You are not alone," she said, pulling back just enough to look up at him. "Not anymore." The expression in his eyes made her heart race. He lifted one hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "Olivia," he said, her name a question and a prayer. She did not think about the consequences. She did not think about her situation or the baby or any of the reasons this was a terrible idea. She simply rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. For a heartbeat, Yates went completely still. Then he was kissing her back with a hunger that took her breath away, his arms tightening around her as if he would never let go. It was nothing like the kisses she had shared with James, which had been practiced and calculated. This was raw and honest, a communion of two lonely souls who had found each other in the darkness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted, his voice rough. "Why did you not?" "Because I did not want you to think I expected anything from you. I did not want you to feel obligated to me." "I do not feel obligated. I feel—" She searched for the right words. "I feel like I have finally come home." He kissed her again, softer this time, a kiss full of promise and tenderness. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, in the circle of his arms, Olivia felt nothing but warmth and safety, and a joy so intense it almost hurt. They sat together by the fire until the storm passed, talking in quiet voices about their hopes and fears, their pasts, and their possible futures. Yates told her about his dreams for the ranch, his plans to expand the herd and improve the breeding stock. Olivia told him about her father, who had died when she was 16, and how much she still missed him. "He would have liked you," she said. "He always said that a man's worth was measured by how he treated those who could do nothing for him." "Then I hope I would have measured up." "You would have." When the fire burned low, Yates walked her to her room. At the door, he took her hands in his and looked at her with an expression that made her feel cherished. "I do not want to rush you," he said. "I know you have been through a lot and you need time, but I want you to know that my feelings for you are real. This is not about convenience or obligation. I care about you, Olivia. You and your baby." Tears pricked her eyes. "I care about you too, more than I thought possible." He kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. "Good night, Olivia. Good night." She lay in bed for a long time after he left, her hand pressed to her stomach where the baby was growing. She had come to Loveland expecting nothing and had found everything she had not known she was looking for. She had found a home, a purpose, and a man who looked at her like she was something precious. For the first time since she had discovered she was pregnant, she felt a flicker of hope for the future. The days that followed were some of the happiest Olivia had ever known. She and Yates navigated their new relationship with care, neither of them wanting to rush, but both unable to deny the pull between them. They found excuses to touch each other, a hand on a shoulder as she passed him in the kitchen, his fingers brushing hers as he handed her a dish. They sat together in the evenings talking or simply enjoying each other's company, and sometimes Yates would take her hand and hold it like it was something infinitely valuable. The ranch hands noticed the change between them and approved. One evening, Charlie, the oldest of the hands, pulled Olivia aside as she was cleaning up after supper. "I have known Yates since he was a boy," Charlie said, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "I have never seen him this happy. Whatever you are doing, keep doing it. I am not doing anything special. You are making him smile again. That is plenty special." September arrived with cooler temperatures and the promise of autumn. Olivia's pregnancy was now obvious to everyone, her belly round and full beneath her dresses. The baby moved constantly, little flutters and kicks that reminded her of the life she carried. She found herself talking to the child, telling it stories about the ranch and Yates and the life they were building together. One afternoon, as she was kneading bread in the kitchen, Yates came in and stood watching her work. She could feel his eyes on her, and when she looked up, the expression on his face made her breath catch. "What is it?" she asked. "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Olivia's hands stilled in the dough, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, crossing the kitchen to stand in front of her. "I know it is fast, and I know you have reasons to be cautious. But I love you, Olivia. I love the way you hum when you are cooking, and the way you talk to the horses when you think no one is listening. I love your strength and your courage, and the way you make this house feel like a home. I want to spend my life with you. I want to raise your baby as my own and give you more children if you will have them. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night." Tears streamed down Olivia's face, but for once they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, her flower-covered hands leaving white prints on his shirt. He kissed her with a passion that left her dizzy, and she kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all of her love and gratitude and hope into the embrace. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. I love you so much. I love you too. You have no idea how much. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Loveland, with Dr. Pritchard as Yates's best man and Helen Morrison standing up with Olivia. The townspeople who had whispered about her just months before now came to the wedding, their earlier judgment apparently forgotten or at least set aside. Olivia wore a simple dress that Helen had helped her alter to accommodate her growing belly, and she carried wildflowers that Yates had picked that morning. When the minister asked if Yates took Olivia to be his lawfully wedded wife, he answered with a firm "I do" that resonated through the church. And when it was her turn, Olivia looked into his gray eyes and said "I do" with all the love in her heart. The kiss they shared as husband and wife was chaste by necessity, given their audience, but the promise in it was clear. Olivia felt like she was floating as they walked back down the aisle together, Yates's hand warm and strong in hers. There was a small celebration at the ranch that evening, with the hands raising toasts to the newlyweds and Charlie playing a fiddle he produced from somewhere. Olivia danced with Yates in the yard, the stars wheeling overhead and the mountains standing silent, witness to their joy. Thank you, she said as they swayed together to Charlie's music. For what? For asking nothing and offering everything. For giving me a home and a future when I thought I had neither. He pulled her closer, as close as her belly would allow. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for trusting me with your heart. I will always trust you, and I will always protect you. You and our children. The word "our" made her heart swell. He meant it, she realized. He truly intended to raise her baby as his own, to give the child his name and his love. It was more than she had ever hoped for, more than she thought she deserved. That night, Olivia moved her belongings from the small room off the kitchen into Yates's larger bedroom at the front of the house. It felt strange and wonderful at the same time, this new intimacy they would share. Yates was patient and gentle with her, mindful of her condition, showing her with his touch and his words how precious she was to him. I never thought I would be this happy, she confessed as they lay together in the darkness, his arm around her and her head on his chest. Neither did I, but I am glad we found each other. So am I. October arrived with a riot of color as the aspens on the mountainsides turned gold. Olivia's pregnancy entered its final weeks, and she grew increasingly uncomfortable as the baby seemed to take up all the space inside her. She could no longer see her feet, and getting out of bed became a major undertaking. Yates hovered over her like a worried mother hen, constantly asking if she needed anything or if she was feeling all right. I am fine, she told him for the 100th time. Women have been having babies for thousands of years. I will be fine. I know, but I am allowed to worry about you. You are allowed, but you do not need to treat me like I am made of glass. Despite her reassurances, she was nervous about the birth. Her mother had died in childbirth when Olivia was 18, and though she tried not to think about it, the memory haunted her. Yates seemed to sense her fear, and he made a point of bringing Dr. Pritchard out to the ranch to examine her and assure them both that everything was progressing normally. You are healthy and strong, the doctor said after his examination. The baby is positioned correctly, and I see no reason to expect complications. But I want you to send for me the moment labor starts. I would rather be here too early than too late. We will, Yates promised, his hand gripping Olivia's tightly. On a cold morning in late October, Olivia woke to find her nightgown soaked and a strange tightening in her belly. She knew immediately what was happening and shook Yates awake. The baby is coming, she said, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. Yates was out of bed in an instant, pulling on his pants and boots with frantic haste. I will get the doctor. Will you be all right here? Yes, just hurry. He kissed her quickly and ran from the room. Olivia heard him shouting for one of the hands to saddle a fast horse, and then the sound of hoofbeats racing away from the ranch. She got out of bed carefully and changed into a clean nightgown, then made her way to the kitchen to heat water. The contractions were still far apart, but she knew from stories she had heard that labor could last for hours or even days. Helen Morrison arrived within an hour, summoned by one of the ranch hands. Dr. Pritchard is on his way, she said, taking charge with the calm efficiency of a woman who had seen many births. But let us get you comfortable in the meantime. The next hours passed in a haze of pain and effort. The contractions grew stronger and closer together, each one a wave that threatened to drown her. Helen stayed by her side, offering encouragement and cool cloths for her forehead. Yates returned with the doctor and hovered anxiously in the doorway until Helen shooed him out. Men just get in the way, she said firmly. You can see your wife after the baby is born. But Olivia did not want him to leave. She reached out a hand, and he crossed the room in 2 strides, taking it in both of his. Stay, she said, her voice breaking. Please stay. I am not going anywhere, he promised, settling into the chair beside the bed. He stayed through all of it, holding her hand and letting her squeeze until his fingers must have gone numb. He wiped the sweat from her face and told her she was doing wonderfully, even when she was sure she could not go on. And when the baby finally came, slipping into the world with a loud wail of protest, he was the first one besides the doctor to see the tiny, perfect child. It is a boy, Dr. Pritchard announced, wrapping the baby in a clean blanket. A healthy boy. Yates looked at Olivia, with tears streaming down his face. You did it, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You were so brave. The doctor placed the baby in her arms, and Olivia looked down at the tiny face, the shock of dark hair, the impossibly small fingers that curled around her thumb. She had expected to feel resentment or fear or regret, but all she felt was an overwhelming love that took her breath away. Hello, little one, she whispered. Welcome to the world. Yates reached out and gently touched the baby's head, his large hand dwarfing the tiny skull. He is beautiful. You are both beautiful. What should we name him? Olivia asked. They had discussed names over the past few weeks, but nothing had seemed quite right. Now, looking at her son, one name seemed to fit perfectly. Thomas, she said, after my father. Thomas Owens, Yates said, trying it out. I like it. Thomas Yates Owens. Perfect. Dr. Pritchard finished his examination and pronounced both mother and baby healthy. Helen helped Olivia into a clean nightgown and changed the bedding, then tactfully suggested that everyone leave so the new mother could rest. I will check on you tomorrow, the doctor said. But you did wonderfully, Mrs. Owens. Get some sleep. After they left, Yates lay down beside Olivia, careful not to jostle her or the baby. Thomas had fallen asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. They lay there together, the 3 of them, and Olivia felt a peace settle over her that went soul deep. Thank you, Yates said softly, for giving me this, for trusting me with your son. He is our son now, Olivia corrected, in every way that matters. Our son, Yates repeated, and the wonder in his voice made her smile. The weeks that followed were exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Thomas was a good baby for the most part, sleeping in stretches of 3 or 4 hours and eating with enthusiasm. Olivia was tired all the time, but it was a good tired, the kind that came from caring for someone she loved. Yates was a devoted father from the start. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Thomas when the baby was fussy, and looked at his son with an expression of such pure love that it made Olivia's heart ache. The ranch hands were equally smitten, taking turns holding the baby and arguing over who Thomas resembled more. He has his mother's eyes, Charlie declared. Nonsense. Those are Owen's eyes, another hand countered. Olivia did not bother correcting them. As far as anyone in Loveland knew, Thomas was Yates's biological son, born slightly early but perfectly healthy. The few people who might have counted the months and come up with uncomfortable questions kept their suspicions to themselves, perhaps recognizing that the Owens family had found happiness and should be left in peace. Winter came to Colorado with a vengeance, bringing snow that piled high against the house and temperatures that made even the short walk to the barn an ordeal. But inside, the house was warm and full of life. Olivia had never been happier, waking each morning to the sound of her son's cries and her husband's gentle voice as he soothed the baby back to sleep. On Christmas morning, Yates gave her a gift wrapped in brown paper. She opened it to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting to be filled. For writing down Thomas's milestones, he explained, so we never forget any of it. She threw her arms around him, the journal clutched to her chest. It is perfect. Thank you. I have one more thing. He pulled a small box from his pocket and handed it to her. Inside was a delicate gold ring set with 3 small stones, a ruby, a sapphire, and a diamond. Red for you, blue for me, and clear for Thomas, he said, as he slipped it onto her finger beside her wedding band. Our family. I love it. I love you. I love you too, more than I ever thought possible. They spent the day together, just the 3 of them, watching Thomas try to grasp the ribbons Olivia dangled in front of him and laughing at his serious expressions. It was a simple day, but one Olivia knew she would remember for the rest of her life. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting in fits and starts as the days grew longer and warmer. Thomas was growing rapidly, his eyes bright and curious, his little body filling out with healthy weight. He smiled at everything, but his biggest smiles were reserved for Yates, who made faces and spoke nonsense to make the baby laugh. In April, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again. The realization filled her with a complex mixture of emotions. She was happy, of course, but also nervous about how Yates would react. They had not discussed having more children, though he had mentioned it on the night he proposed. She told him one evening after Thomas was asleep, the words tumbling out in a rush. I am pregnant again. I know it is soon, and we probably should have been more careful, but I am happy about it if you are. Yates stared at her for a moment, and then a grin spread across his face that was almost boyish. You are pregnant? Yes. We are having another baby? Yes. He whooped with joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. This is wonderful. This is the best news I have had since the day you married me. You are not worried about the timing? Why would I be worried? We have a good home, a successful ranch, and enough love for a dozen children. I could not be happier. His enthusiasm was contagious, and Olivia found her own excitement growing. This baby, unlike Thomas, would be conceived in love and born into a stable home. She allowed herself to imagine the future, to picture their children growing up on the ranch, learning to ride horses and herd cattle, and love this wild, beautiful land as much as their father did. The pregnancy was easier than her first had been. She was not as sick, and she had Yates to care for her and help with Thomas. The ranch hands pitched in as well, taking on extra chores so she could rest when she needed to. By the time summer arrived, she felt strong and healthy, her body adapting to the demands of carrying new life. Thomas took his first steps in July, wobbling across the parlor floor into Yates's waiting arms. They celebrated with cake and laughter, and Yates declared it a sign that his son was destined to be a rancher like his father. He will need to keep up with all his brothers and sisters, Yates said, his hand resting on Olivia's rounded belly. How many children are you planning on having? She asked, amused. As many as you are willing to give me. I always wanted a big family. Then I suppose we are on the right track. Their second child, a girl they named Rose after Yates's mother, was born in November. The birth was easier than Thomas's had been, and within hours Olivia was sitting up in bed, nursing her daughter and marveling at the perfection of her tiny features. She looks just like you, Yates said, touching Rose's soft cheek with one finger. You say that about all of them, because it is true, my beautiful wife and our beautiful children. Thomas, who was just over a year old, was fascinated by his new sister. He toddled over to the bed and reached out a chubby hand to touch her, his eyes wide with wonder. Olivia felt her heart swell with love for her little family, for the husband who looked at her like she hung the moon, and the children who had given her life new meaning and purpose. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. Olivia and Yates added two more children to their family, another son named William in 1881, and a daughter named Grace in 1883. The house rang with laughter and the sound of running feet, and Olivia sometimes had to pinch herself to believe that this was her life. Yates was a wonderful father, patient and loving, and always ready to play. He taught Thomas and William to ride almost before they could walk, and he braided Rose's hair with a care that never failed to make Olivia smile. Grace was still too young for much beyond being spoiled by everyone, but Olivia had no doubt she would grow up strong and confident like her siblings. The ranch prospered under Yates's careful management. The herd grew larger, and he was able to hire more hands and build a new barn. He bought adjacent land from a neighbor who was moving east, expanding their holdings and securing their future. But through all the success and growth, Yates never forgot what mattered most. Every evening, no matter how busy the day had been, he made time to sit with Olivia and talk about their day, to hold her hand and remind her that she was loved. He never mentioned Thomas's parentage, never treated him differently than the other children. As far as anyone in Loveland knew, Thomas was a Owens through and through, and Yates made sure he grew up knowing he was loved and wanted. On a warm evening in May of 1885, Olivia sat on the porch watching her children play in the yard. Thomas was 7 now, tall for his age, and already showing signs of the man he would become. Rose was 5, all energy and smiles, bossing her brothers around with the confidence of a born leader. William was 4, quieter than his siblings, but just as loved. And Grace was 2, toddling after the older children with determination. Yates came out and sat beside her, handing her a cup of coffee. Tired? A little, but happy. Me too. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, savoring the warmth and strength of his presence. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Taking me in when I showed up with nothing?" "Never, not for a single moment." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Olivia. You and these children. I thank God every day that you stepped off that stagecoach and into my life. I love you," she said, the words inadequate to express the depth of her feelings. "I love you too. Always." They sat together in the fading light, watching their children and counting their blessings. Olivia thought about the frightened, desperate woman she had been 7 years ago, arriving in Loveland with nothing but a secret and a prayer. She thought about Yates, who had asked nothing and offered everything, who had given her a home and a family and a love that had transformed her life. She had come west expecting nothing and had found more than she ever could have imagined. She had found a home in the wild beauty of Colorado, a purpose in caring for her family, and a love that would last all of her days. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here and the man who had made it all possible. The children grew older, and the seasons turned in their endless cycle. Thomas became a capable young rancher, working alongside his father and learning everything Yates could teach him. Rose developed a love of books and declared she wanted to be a teacher like Mrs. Morrison, who still ran the school in town. William showed a talent for working with horses, gentling even the most difficult animals with patience and understanding. And Grace grew into a spirited child who kept everyone on their toes with her endless questions and boundless energy. Olivia watched them all with pride, marveling at how different they were from each other, and yet how they all carried pieces of her and Yates in their personalities and their dreams. She wrote about them in the journal Yates had given her, filling page after page with stories and milestones, creating a record of their lives that they could look back on in years to come. In 1888, when Thomas was 10, he asked Olivia about his real father. She had been expecting the question for years, had rehearsed various answers in her mind, but when the moment came, she found herself unprepared for the direct honesty in her son's eyes. They were sitting on the porch, just the two of them, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Thomas had been unusually quiet all day, and Olivia had sensed something weighing on his mind. "Mama," he said suddenly, "Billy Sanders said I do not look like Papa. He said maybe I am not really Papa's son." Olivia's heart clenched. She had known this day would come, but knowing it and facing it were two different things. She took a deep breath and chose her words carefully. "Your papa is Yates Owens," she said firmly. "He has raised you from the day you were born, and he loves you as much as any father could love a son. But you are right that he is not your biological father. The man who fathered you was someone I knew in St. Louis before I came here. He was not a good man, Thomas, and he did not want to be part of your life. So I came west looking for a fresh start, and I found your papa. He chose to be your father. Do you understand the difference?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "So Papa wanted me, even though I was not really his?" "You are really his in every way that matters. Blood does not make a family, Thomas. Love does. And your Papa loves you with his whole heart. I love him too. He is the best Papa in the whole world. Yes, he is. And you never have to worry about that changing. You are his son now and always." Thomas seemed satisfied with this answer, and the subject was not raised again. But that evening, Olivia told Yates about the conversation, and he immediately went to find Thomas. She watched from the window as they walked together toward the barn, Yates's hand on Thomas's shoulder, and she knew he was reinforcing everything she had said. When they came back, Thomas was smiling, and Yates's eyes were suspiciously bright. He pulled Olivia into his arms that night and held her close. "Thank you for trusting me with him," he said. "Thank you for letting me be his father. You are his father, in every way that matters. I know, but I am still grateful." The years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and holidays, by droughts and good harvests, by the ordinary miracles of daily life. Olivia and Yates grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They added one more child to their family in 1890, a son they named Henry, and Olivia decided that 5 children was probably enough. "I am getting too old for this," she told Yates, laughing, as she nursed Henry in the early morning hours. "You are only 33. That is hardly old. Tell that to my back and my knees and every other part of me that aches." But despite her complaints, she loved being a mother. She loved the chaos and the noise and the endless demands on her time and attention. She loved watching her children grow and change, developing their own personalities and dreams. And she loved sharing it all with Yates, who remained her partner and her best friend through everything. Thomas grew into a fine young man, strong and capable and kind. At 18, he announced that he wanted to start his own ranch, and Yates helped him purchase land adjacent to their property. Rose went to Teachers College in Denver and returned to Loveland to take over the school when Mrs. Morrison retired. William stayed on the ranch, becoming Yates's right-hand man and eventually taking over much of the day-to-day operations. Grace and Henry were still young, but they showed every sign of growing up just as capable and confident as their older siblings. On a summer evening in 1895, Olivia and Yates celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary. The children had prepared a special dinner, and afterward they all gathered on the porch to watch the stars come out. Thomas was there with his new wife, a sweet girl from town named Elizabeth. Rose had brought her fiancé, a young lawyer who had recently moved to Loveland. The younger children sat at their feet, laughing and teasing each other. "I have been thinking about that day you arrived," Yates said later, when they were alone in their bedroom. "Do you remember it?" "Of course. How could I forget?" I was so scared and so alone, and I had no idea what I was going to do. And now look at you. Look at us. Look at what we have built together. Olivia looked around their bedroom, at the quilt her mother-in-law had made that covered their bed, at the photographs of their children on the dresser, at the life they had created from nothing but hope and hard work and love. We did all right, did we not? She said softly. We did better than all right. We built something beautiful, something that will last long after we are gone. She moved into his arms, fitting against him the way she had 1,000 times before. I love you, Yates Owens. Thank you for giving me a chance when I had nothing to offer. You had everything to offer. You just did not know it yet. He kissed her, a kiss that still held all the passion and tenderness of their early days together. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for building this life with me. I would choose you again. Every time, in every life, I would choose you. They stood together in the quiet darkness, holding each other and counting their blessings. Olivia thought about the long journey that had brought her here, about the girl she had been and the woman she had become. She thought about the secret she had carried and the fear that had driven her west, and how both had led her to the greatest love of her life. She had arrived in Loveland with nothing but a secret growing inside her, alone and afraid and uncertain of the future. And Yates had asked nothing and offered everything, giving her a home and a family and a love that had sustained her through all the years. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for, more than she thought she deserved, and she would spend the rest of her life being grateful for it. As the years went on, Olivia and Yates became pillars of the Loveland community. Their ranch prospered, and they used their success to help others, offering work to those who needed it and support to families struggling through hard times. They raised their children to be kind and hardworking, to value family and community above material wealth, and to treat everyone with respect, regardless of their circumstances. Thomas's ranch grew and thrived, and he and Elizabeth had 3 children of their own, making Olivia and Yates grandparents. Rose married her lawyer and continued teaching, inspiring a new generation of students with her passion for learning. William married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and they had 2 children who were as wild and free as the land they grew up on. Grace surprised everyone by deciding to study medicine, traveling to San Francisco to attend medical school with her parents' full support. And Henry, the youngest, showed every sign of following in his father's footsteps, learning everything he could about ranching and declaring that he would never leave Colorado. In 1905, on a cool October evening, Olivia and Yates celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary and her 50th birthday. The entire family gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted well into the night. The house was full of laughter and love, grandchildren running through the rooms, and 3 generations of Owens family celebrating together. As Olivia looked around at all the faces she loved, at the family that had grown from the seed of hope she had carried west all those years ago, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She thought about the stagecoach that had brought her to Loveland, about the desperate woman who had stepped onto the dusty street with nothing but a secret and a prayer. She thought about Yates, who had seen past her circumstances to the woman she could become, who had offered her everything when he could have easily turned away. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, coming to stand beside her with a cup of punch in his hand. "About how lucky I am, about how different my life could have been if I had not met you. I am the lucky one. You gave me everything I ever wanted and did not know I was missing." They stood together watching their family, their hands intertwined the way they had been for nearly 3 decades. And as the party continued around them, as their children and grandchildren laughed and loved and lived, Olivia sent up a silent prayer of thanksgiving for the day she had arrived in Loveland, for the cowboy who had asked nothing and offered everything, and for the beautiful life they had built together. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Olivia Owens knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had found her home, her purpose, and her happily ever after in the wild beauty of the Colorado frontier, and she would not change a single moment of the journey that had brought her here. This was her story, hers and Yates's, a love story written across the years in laughter and tears, in hard work and hope, in the faces of their children and the legacy they would leave behind. And it was, she thought, as Yates pulled her close and kissed her forehead, the most beautiful story she could have ever imagined.